Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're going to be ranking every single boss battle in Dream Team. And there's only going to be a couple of bosses that aren't taken into consideration. The first one is the first fight you actually have in the game with Intasma, technically. But since you don't actually do damage and it's basically just a tutorial, I won't count it. As well as the Hoorahs in the Hoorah Dream with Big Massive. I will be counting Big Massive, but I won't be counting the Hoorahs. But other than that, don't forget to subscribe and like, or I will make sure you internally fall asleep. And you're going to have to go through black holes to get yourself out of that eternal sleep. And most of the time, I'm going to be cutting you with saw blades. But yeah, let's get started on the video. That was gruesome. Even though I really don't enjoy fighting Smoldergeist, this is the only boss that I actually don't enjoy. So every other boss I do like fighting. Except for giant battles, but that's not what we're talking about over here. But back to the matter on hand. The thing about Smoldergeist is that every problem that I have would at least be minimized or completely gone if this was just considered a normal enemy. But because it's considered a boss, it has more problems than normal. Now, if you don't know my opinion on Pillow Castle, I'll just say it's not very high. Just check my area ranking with the info card that's about to pop up. Because, well, it definitely leads into Smoldergeist as a boss fight. Here's the thing about Smoldergeist. There's another tutorial in there. And it teaches you how to use badges. Now, tutorials in a boss fight are probably something that's so stupid to do for someone like me, because boss fights are actually one of my two favorite things about the Mario RPGs. So if they get ruined by tutorials, that's not fun. And the second reason I actually don't like this fight is because there's no bros items. So all you do is jump or counterattack to do damage, which makes the boss really repetitive and boring. Especially because most of the attacks that Smoldergeist has, you can't counterattack. And speaking of attacks, that actually kind of leads into my third problem. His attacks are just so generic. Now, not for an enemy. For an enemy, his attacks are fine. They're not amazing, but they're fine for an enemy. Kinda goes back to me saying that this boss should have been presented as an enemy. But my fourth problem with this fight is that the fire mechanic where Starlo has to blow the fire out is not a good concept, because you have to rely on Starlo to actually blow them out. And if Starlo doesn't blow them out, and every single one's actually on fire, well, you can't attack. And you may say, well, his attacks are pretty easy to dodge, so he won't have fire. Well, guess what? This is a new player's first boss in the game. So let's say that the new player is just horrible at dodging. So every single enemy still stays on fire. And Starlo just doesn't come out. So what do you have to do? You only have two options. You either jump on the enemy, take 1 damage, or you use a healing item. That's all you can do, which doesn't make the boss fun. And it causes more waiting in the boss. And all these problems that I have are just supported by I don't actually like anything in the boss. So I don't like this boss. This is the only boss I don't actually enjoy. Girlbot was probably destined to be one of the worst bosses in the game, but that's not really a bad thing. I do like fighting Girlbot, even though it is a short experience. But I will say that my opinion has soured on him a bit for a couple reasons. But I think the main reason, the only reason I'm actually going to talk, and I think the repetitiveness of this fight is probably my biggest problem with it. And it's sad, because it's the exact same problem I have with Smoldergeist, where with Smoldergeist you can only use jumps, while obviously with Growbots you can use jumps and hammers, but it's obviously just the smartest to use shells. But they're the exact same attack, so it's repetitive. And they're not even really fun attacks to pull off either, especially comparing it to other attacks that you get a bit later in the game. Even something like the Fire Flower or the Bye Bye Cannon are just miles ahead of the 3D red shell and green shell. But the reason I still like this fight is because of Grobot's attacks. Where Smoldergeist didn't have interesting attacks, Grobot's attacks actually saved the boss for me. And it definitely shows with the screen chase segment, where that's a really enjoyable attack to actually try to dodge. And even his normal attacks are not super easy to dodge. So it's definitely an enjoyable fight that is definitely better than most first bosses in Mario RPGs. I bet you forgot that this fight actually existed, but Dreamy Mario is an enjoyable fight, to be honest, and it's even earlier than Grobot, so it definitely has the problem of not having bros items, but I think the thing that absolutely saves it is not only the attacks, but there's two ways to actually take out Dreamy Mario, which has always been very fascinating to me. And if you're wondering the two ways to take him out, either you attack him on directly and then all of his clones just disappear, or you have yourself attacking one of the clones that's really close to the actual Dreamy Mario, but then you have all your Luigiaries just landing on Dreamy Mario. And if you're wondering, I do the second option, just because it does a bit more damage. And might I add, the attacks that Dreamy Mario and Phantasma actually do are pretty unique and pretty fun to dodge. My personal favorite attack is when Phantasma actually starts running away, and then you start chasing Peach, but then a ton of Star Marios start chasing you and you have to jump over them. I really like that attack, and don't get me wrong, that's not saying that every other attack is a bit boring like I am saying with Grobot. Every other attack definitely has something to it, and probably another attack that I want to mention is when Phantasma is shooting coins, fire, and mushrooms at you, and you have to choose if you either just want to dodge the fire completely or go for mushrooms. But I think my biggest problem with this fight is that the bros items are non-existent. You don't have any yet. You don't have any Luigiary attacks yet, which makes the boss on your end really boring. Dreamy Mario may have some great attacks, but you just don't have any good attacks yet to actually pull off. So it does make the boss a bit boring. This boss is so boring, but it's only this high because, well, you actually have interesting attacks now. But other than that, this boss is so boring, and I don't even like Popple here, unless we're dealing with Wiggler's attacks where he's just holding onto Luigi. That's pretty funny, but when he's just pulling on Wiggler's flower, that's not funny, it's just annoying, and it just makes the boss harder, which is just stupid. And to be honest, I was more entitled to fight Popple than to actually fight Wiggler, because what did Wiggler do? That's the thing about it, Wiggler didn't really deserve to be fought. And again, speaking of Wiggler, it's another Wiggler fight. 2 of the 3 Wiggler fights in the Mario RPGs have been boring and bland. Swiggler is the only one I've actually enjoyed. Definitely no bias there. And guess what? That trend continues because this boss is just another Wiggler fight. But I will say that I did like when Wiggler dies and then you have to fight Popple, because it was reminiscent of when you fought Popple in Superstar Saga, and it was definitely satisfying to kill Popple because he was a nuisance in this fight. So I don't actually find this boss very interesting, but I do think that since you actually have bros items, it's definitely more interesting than any of the fights that we talked about so far. I don't really have anything to say about Torque I do like his attacks, they're pretty cool. I really like the attack where Torque takes Mario off screen and then you have Luigi where you have to dodge enemies that are just coming in randomly. I really like that, that's cool. But honestly, this is just a better version of Grobot. And that's it. Which obviously isn't a bad thing, but it's just a bit annoying because I'm trying to find things to actually say about Torque. I do like that you get to use the Fire Flower and the Red Shell. I do actually like using the 3D shells if I don't have to use both of them at the same time. And since I'm using the Fire Flower with the Red Shell, it's definitely an enjoyable experience with this fight. And I definitely think that it's more enjoyable than Wiggler and Popple because it actually has unique attacks unlike Wiggler and Popple. This is gonna get really hard to explain why I like the bosses ahead. I think a lot of it is just gonna be, I like this thing more than the boss below it. So expect a lot of that coming up. Bowser is fine as a boss. I do like that he's powered up by Phantasma, which makes his attacks definitely harder, and I do like all of his attacks a decent amount. My personal favorite, unsurprisingly, is the screen chase segment where there's a ton of flames and then you have to either jump over them or dodge them. And if they're purple flames, then they're too high for you to actually jump over. And I do like that you're forced to actually jump over some of them, or you will get damaged. I do like part of that. But I think the problem is that the only attack that you actually have is the Luiginary Ball, which I do personally think that it should have been replaced with the Luiginary Stack, because the Luiginary Ball doesn't seem very useful here. Obviously, it's good for damage, don't get me wrong, but honestly, it's not good for just specifically targeting Bowser. So I don't think it's a great fight. I definitely think that some things could have been tweaked a bit, but I do genuinely like this fight. Big Massive feels like every single Hoorah's good attack built onto one big boy. And that's honestly how I feel about this fight. And that is not a bad thing, because since it's every single good attack, it definitely makes this fight fun. And it absolutely helps that you don't have the Luiginary Hammer yet, because your best attack that you get to use then is the Luiginary Stack, because that actually focuses one enemy. But since that's actually pretty hard to pull off and excellent with, most people will pick the Luiginary Ball, and that definitely makes the boss harder. My favorite attack from Big Massive is actually the original attack that he has, and that's when he becomes a tower, and then he tries to plummet you, and, well, it just sends a shockwave. And that attack is really hard to dodge. It's a really hard attack to dodge, and I'm glad that that's the attack that's signature to Big Massive, because it's the hardest one out of every single Hoorah that you've actually fought before. So, just adding the fact that I really like the set of bros items that you use to defeat Big Massive, I really like his attacks. Just because of that, it's a fun fight. Palladium is a fun fight, do not get me wrong, but I think the only reason it didn't get into the top 5 is because it wasn't hard enough. And also the use of the Jetboard Bash, but we'll get into that a bit later. The thing about this boss is that if this boss had more power and a bit more HP, I think it would have made the top 5. But I don't really care for it because it's too easy. And don't get me wrong, this boss has some hard attacks, but since it doesn't have the power set to actually back it up, it's not actually a difficult fight. And that's actually disappointing because it's the second to last area in the game. One of the last real world bosses that you actually have. So this is not a difficult boss, and it definitely should have been harder than it actually was. But I really do like that you have to destroy both of his wings. Well, you don't actually have to, which definitely makes it a bit more versatile as a boss. But once you do, then his attacks actually get slower, and he's dropping in defense and power. And then you get to use the Jetboard Bash, which I do think it's a bit annoying that you can't actually use a Jetboard Bash when he's flying, which is definitely a problem with the Jetboard Bash in general. But it is definitely annoying that you can't really use it all the time. So you have to just use stuff like Bomb Derby and Sling Sniper. So I do definitely like this fight. I really like the attacks. I like how hard the attacks actually are. I like the use of the Jetboard Bash when he's actually down. I like his dialogue a bit, but I think it just should have been a bit harder. Momoshka is such a fun fight, and that's because, well, both of your most strongest bros attacks are targeting his weak point. The Bye-Bye Cannon and the Drop Chopper, even though I don't like the Drop Chopper, both target his weak point. So, to balance that out, the developers made his attacks really difficult to dodge. But if you dodge them, it's really rewarding and it does a ton of damage. And that's really nice for a returning player. This is one of my favorite bosses for a returning player, even though I feel like the bosses that are ahead of it are really favored to newer players. But this boss is so difficult for a rerun, and it's surprising that I actually find this boss so fun, especially that ending segment where he just breaks out of his shell and you have to just run after him and jump on him. That's so cool, and it's so creative, and I wish more bosses did that. That's the thing about this boss. This boss is really hard with his attacks, but he's really weak to both of your strongest attacks. I also forgot to say that he can put on a spike helmet if you're too late to actually attack his minions. That's pretty cool. Again, I just like the concepts that this boss brings, and every single one of them works. And some people might be annoyed that this boss does too much damage, but for me, I just like this boss because it's so much more challenging than all the bosses in this game. Yeah, I even think it's more challenging than bosses like Phantasma and Dreamy Bowser, at least in the stages of the game that you're in. Kamek was originally number 3, but literally right before I was recording this segment, I swapped Kamek to number 4. And the main reason for that is because Kamek is such a forgettable fight. And the reason why is because you fight him 3 times and, well, do you really remember the first 2 phases? I know I don't. I remember the last phase where he split up into 4 Kameks, and that was a good fight, but it's not very memorable. So that's why I had to place him at number 4. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely a good fight. I do like that the white Kamek heals every single one, and each Kamek actually has a different purpose, and you actually want to target each one for a different reason. Again, strategy is nice, but even though, again, the strategy, different types of Kameks, the attacks are really cool, I honestly just have that same thought with the number 3 spot, and that's why Kamek's number 4. The Elite Trio, most people would put this boss at number 1, but I honestly just don't think it deserves to be there. Even with it being a great personal experience that I actually had with this fight, I still think that it's not better than the final bosses in the game. The Elite Trio is just such a really cool concept with it. You have to kill all 3 at the exact same time to actually defeat them, which is just such a cool concept. Everyone's praised that. But the reason why I personally really like the fight is when I replayed Dream Team for this channel. I didn't actually get all the attack pieces for the Luigi Flame. I just couldn't find one of the attack pieces. I was an idiot, okay? Calm down. The thing about it, though, is this boss is really hard to actually defeat without the Luigi Flame. So it was actually pretty interesting using other Luigi attacks to actually defeat all of them. And then I ended up using the Luigi Ball, but I first tried to use the Luigi Hammer, which wasn't actually that bad of an idea. So this boss is very versatile, it's a fun fight, these attacks are really cool, and I just like the personality of the Elite Trio. So this is a really fun fight, and I definitely just see why people would put it at number 1, but I personally wouldn't. Dreamy Bowser is not number 1. And honestly, we all know that the top 2 were gonna be Dreamy Bowser and Phantasma, but it was a race to the top. But then I realized a fatal flaw of Dreamy Bowser that puts Phantasma at number 1. But, I mean, it's process of elimination. Come on, you already kinda knew that. The reason why Dreamy Bowser is not number 1 is because for a final boss, it is way too easy. And it's really disappointing because I beat him with no struggle at all. And I was at level 45, which isn't even that high. That's the thing about it. This boss is way too easy to be a final boss. Compare Dreamy Bowser to Elder Princess Shroob. Not myself, but the actual final boss. Oh my god. Dreamy Bowser is way too easy. And might I add that Dreamy Bowser's attacks, while very unique and very cool to see, are way too easy. And that's the thing about it. All of this is basically just for show. While Phantasma is actually somewhat difficult, even though I do think that the Battle Ring definitely boosted my opinion of Phantasma hugely. But just this fight in general is just a bit disappointing. Especially the fact that you don't really have a use for using the Z-Egg on the final boss. Now I praise the Bye-Bye Cannon for being really useful on Dreamy Bowser, but it's really disappointing that the Z-Egg is basically useless because of it. It's really only useful to take out the arms. And that's it. That's the thing about the boss. There's nothing to it except for destroy the arms and then attack Bowser on its head. But guess what? Pillow Dream actually did that already. So it's not very unique and it's somewhat boring. This is not a great final boss, even though I do still really like fighting Dreamy Bowser. Phantasma, not a difficult boss, but probably the second most difficult boss next to Mamushka, because in reality, this boss has some really hard attacks. Even though they don't look cool, they are really hard to dodge. Just look at any attack that Phantasma does to you and you get hit. You fall asleep and you have to continue running away from Phantasma until you fall into the correct black hole. And I think it's really nice that once you actually get into the correct one, there's actually mushrooms and coins. That's really nice, especially because of the saw blades that are in all the other ones. That's really cool. I also like the fact that if you jump over one, then you can actually see if it's correct. Again, just those little things I really like about Phantasma X. All the attacks are at least a bit difficult. I really like the use of the Luiginary Hammer. I really like that you can use the Luiginary Wall. You can use every single Luiginary attack if you want to. I like Dreambird's involvement. Every little thing about this boss I enjoy. The only thing maybe, just maybe, is that I really wish that this boss was a bit more difficult. But other than that, I really enjoy Phantasma. Even though Phantasma X is probably my favorite boss of all time in Dream Team. Thank you guys for watching this video. My next video will be about the 1,000-Year Door. Thank you guys for watching. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm going to end the video here.